My husband asked for a divorce because I never came back from the United States. I left India thinking it would be for a short while, just to help my children in the United States. But what was temporary turned into years. And without realizing it, I kept staying, giving more and more of myself, always putting their lives ahead of mine. In the middle of all this, I began to drift away from my husband, from my home, and from who I was before. This story is about choices that seem right at first, but that, little by little, exact a high price. About the weight of being a mother. About the silence within a marriage that slowly unravels without any fights. And about the moment you realize you lived so much for others that you forgot yourself. And when I finally decided to change, there was already too much at stake. Perhaps too late. The day my husband asked for a divorce had no shouting. Only silence. A heavy silence that seemed to travel through the phone and settle inside my chest. You never came back, Meher. So I'm going to move on alone. Those were his words. I stood still, phone in hand, staring at the white wall of the room I rented in the United States. I didn't cry right away. I think my body hadn't yet understood what was happening. 30 years of marriage, reduced to one calm, almost weary sentence. And the most painful part wasn't the divorce. It was realizing that, deep down, he was right. I never came back. My name is Meher Kaur Bedi. I was born in Ludhiana, in Punjab, a loud, vibrant city, full of the smell of spices and familiar voices. I grew up in a simple home, where I learned early that a strong woman is not one who speaks loudly. She is one who endures. I married young, as many of us did. My husband, Harjit, was a good man, not one for many words, but he worked hard. We built our life together, slowly, with effort. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. I never dreamed of leaving India. My life was there. My home, my routine, my neighbors who knew my name, the sound of pots in the kitchen, the warm afternoons sitting on the porch. But life sometimes changes without asking permission. It all began when our eldest son decided to try his luck in the United States. He said there were opportunities there, that he could grow, help the family. At first, I was afraid. It was too far. It felt like another world. But he went, and as many mothers do. I supported him, even with a heavy heart. The first years were difficult for him. Simple jobs, long hours, little money. But gradually, he found his footing. And that was when he started insisting, "Mom, come over for a while. Help me, I need you." At first, I said no. I had my home, my husband, my entire life there. It made no sense to abandon everything. But he kept asking. And along with the asking, came that thing only a child knows how to awaken. Guilt just a few months, mom a few months. That was how it all began. When I arrived in the United States, I felt I didn't belong there. Everything was different. The language, the weather, the people. Even the silence was different. In India, silence is never complete. There is always some sound, some life nearby. There, it was empty. I moved in with my son. At first, he shared a small apartment with 2 other men. Later, he found a better place, and I began taking care of the house, cooking, doing laundry. Things I had always done, but that felt heavier there, because I wasn't home. I told myself it was temporary. I counted the days until I could go back. But the months passed, and something began to shift. My son started depending on me in ways I hadn't expected. He worked all day, came home exhausted, and I did everything so he wouldn't need to worry about anything. Food ready, house clean, clothes organized, and without noticing. I began filling a role that was no longer just that of a mother. It was support foundation. He would say, "Mom, without you I can't manage," and that kept me bound. Harjit called every day at first. He asked when I would come back. I said soon, but that soon never came. Because there was always something. My son needed to save money. Then he needed to change jobs. Then he wanted to bring his sister over too. Then the idea of buying a car came up, and I kept staying. At first, I felt a deep longing. Longing for my home, my husband, my routine. I cried in secret at night, so no one would see. I didn't want to worry anyone. I've always been like that. I swallow the pain and carry on. But with time, The longing transformed into something else, distance. Harjit and I began talking less. The calls grew shorter. Sometimes I was too tired to talk. Other times, he seemed distant too. His life continued without me, and mine continued without him. The years passed faster than I had imagined. My daughter came to the United States as well. At first, it felt like a joy. I thought that with both of them nearby, I could finally go back with peace of mind. But it wasn't like that. She also started working very long hours, living a rushed life. And once again, I found myself doing everything for them. I became the household's balancing point, the one who holds everything together, the one who solves things, the one who cares. And little by little, I stopped being Meher. I became simply Mom. Harjit changed. I could hear it in his voice. He didn't complain. He never was one to complain. But his silence began to weigh more than any words. Once, he said something that stayed with me for a long time. "It seems like you've built another life over there." I wanted to tell him no, that it wasn't true, but deep down, it was. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't chosen to abandon my marriage. I just kept staying, always for a valid reason. Always for someone else, never for myself. There was one specific day I remember clearly. It was winter. Very cold. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when my son walked in and said, "Mom, I got a promotion." I was happy, very happy. But shortly after he said, "Now I'm going to need you more than ever." That should have sounded like love. But it sounded like a prison. And it was in that moment that, for the first time, I thought about going back for real. Not someday, not maybe, back that night, I called Harjit. It had been a long time since we'd had a long conversation. I said, "I think I'm going to come back on the other end." There was silence, a silence that lasted too long. And then he replied, "You think, or you've decided?" That question pierced me because I didn't know how to answer. I never knew my entire life. I lived making decisions for others. And when the time came to decide for myself, I froze in the days that followed. I tried to organize everything. I thought about dates, flights, what the return would look like. But there was always something pulling me back. My daughter needed help. My son was overwhelmed. The household depended on me, and I always chose to stay. Because it was easier to continue than to break away. Easier to sacrifice than to confront. The calls with Harjit became even rarer until one day. He stopped calling, and I didn't call either. That was how silence settled between us for good. A silence that, months later, would end in that phone call, that simple sentence, that ending. When I hung up the phone that day, I sat down on the kitchen floor. The rice was still on the stove. The house was silent. And for the first time in many years, I felt completely alone. Not as a mother, not as a wife, but as a woman. And it was there that I understood something it had taken me years to see. I had spent so much time trying to be everything to everyone that I had stopped being someone to myself. But what I still didn't know was that this was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of the hardest part, because losing a marriage hurts, but losing yourself hurts far more, and I still had much to face, much to understand, and above all, much to decide. I took a few minutes to get up from the kitchen floor. The rice had already gone past the point of no return, stuck to the bottom of the pot. The smell began filling the apartment, but I did nothing. I stayed there, watching it burn, as if it were a reflection of my own life. It was in that moment that something inside me began to change. It wasn't a dramatic change, the kind you see in movies. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was real. In the days that followed, I continued my routine as I always had. Woke up early, made coffee, tidied the house, separated the laundry, cooked lunch, waited for my children to come home. Everything the same, but inside, nothing was the same. I carried that sentence with me constantly. You never came back. So I'm going to move on alone. At first, I tried to convince myself that he was overreacting, that he could wait a little longer, that deep down, he knew I was doing all of this for the family. But gradually, the truth began to surface in a way I could no longer ignore. I was no longer married, and the worst part, I hadn't even noticed when I had stopped being. My daughter was the first to sense something was wrong. "Mom, you've been too quiet." I smiled, as I always did. Just tired, but it wasn't that. It was an emptiness I didn't know how to explain. It was as if I had lived so many years on autopilot that when I finally paused, I no longer knew who I was. That week, I tried calling Harjit. I called twice. The first time, he didn't answer. The second time, it just rang until it cut off. I didn't try again, not out of pride, but because, deep down, I knew there was nothing left to say. The words had come too late. One evening, after my children had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The television was on, but I wasn't paying attention. My mind drifted back to Ludhiana. I could picture my house as if I were there. The porch, the walls, the objects I had left behind. I could almost smell the food I used to make. And, for the first time in many years, I felt a different kind of longing. It wasn't just longing for a place. It was longing for who I was in that place. I began to realize that, in the United States, I hadn't built a life. I had occupied a space. I lived inside my children's routine. My decisions were based on their needs. My time was theirs, my energy was theirs, and without noticing, I had become invisible to myself. A few days later, something small happened, but it was like a jolt. My daughter came home from work early and said, "Mom, I'm going out with some friends tonight. Can you have dinner ready? Because I don't know what time I'll be back." I said yes. Of course I did. I always said yes. But as I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, a question appeared in my head, strong and insistent. "And what about you, Meher? What do you want?" I stopped. I stood there looking at the knife in my hand, and I realized I didn't know how to answer. That frightened me more than the divorce, more than the distance, more than anything. Because, for the first time, I understood that I had spent an entire life without ever asking myself that. I had always been a daughter, a wife, a mother, but I had never been me. That same night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there tossing and turning, thinking about everything. My marriage, the years I spent away, the decisions I never made, and above all, time. The time that passed, the time I didn't notice passing, the time that doesn't come back. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went out alone with no destination, no specific reason. I just went. The air was cold. I walked slowly, watching people go by, each one with their own life, their own troubles, their own choices. And for the first time since arriving in the United States, I felt a little bit present, as if I had woken from a dream that had gone on far too long. I walked into a small cafe, sat by the window, ordered a tea, and stayed there, watching people talking, laughing, scrolling through their phones, living. And I thought, how many of these people are also lost, but keep on smiling? Because that's what we do, isn't it? We carry on, even when we're broken inside. It was there, in that simple cafe, that I made a decision. It wasn't a complete decision, not yet, but it was a beginning. I decided I needed to think about myself for the first time, without guilt, without fear, without thinking of others first. When I got home, everything looked the same, but I was no longer the same. I began to observe more closely conversations, attitudes, small details, and I began to notice something that, until then, I had avoided seeing. My children loved me. I knew that, but they had also grown accustomed to me, accustomed to my constant presence, to my care, to my automatic yes. They didn't ask, they expected, and I always delivered. A few days later, my son came home from work and said, "Mom, can you wash my clothes today? I need them first thing tomorrow." I looked at him, and for the first time, I hesitated. It was just a second, but it was enough for him to notice. "Is everything okay?" he asked, and I replied, "Not today." He was surprised. So was I. The silence that followed that answer was strange, heavy, but at the same time, freeing. It was a small no, but for me, it was enormous. That night, I sat in my room and cried, not from sadness, but from an emotion I didn't know how to name. It was as if, slowly, I was finding my way back to myself. But every change comes with a price. And I still didn't know how much this decision to start choosing myself would shake everything around me. Because when you spend years being the foundation of everything, people don't know what to do when you begin to step out of that role. And that was exactly what started to happen. My daughter began to complain. "Mom, you're different." My son became quieter. The atmosphere in the house changed. Small tensions began to surface. Nothing explosive, but constant, like a quiet pressure. And in the middle of all of it, a question began to grow inside me. If I'm no longer needed here, then why am I still staying? That question was the beginning of something I could no longer avoid. The decision I had postponed for years was finally arriving. And this time, I couldn't run from it. The first time my daughter raised her voice at me, I felt as if something inside me had broken for good. It wasn't a loud shout. It wasn't the kind of argument you see in soap operas. It was worse. It was a cold tone, tired, almost impatient. "Mom, you can't just change like this." I stood still, looking at her. The words stuck in my throat because for many years, I had taught her to speak with respect. And in that moment, it wasn't disrespect. It was a lack of understanding. Everything began to grow more tense after I started saying no, not to everything, but to some things, small things, simple things, but things that, to them, felt enormous. I stopped doing everything automatically. I began leaving some tasks for them to handle. I started going out more. I began staying quiet when something bothered me, instead of swallowing it, and that upset the balance of the house. My son changed too. He didn't argue, but I could tell. The way he looked at me, as if he were trying to understand who this woman was, the one who, suddenly, no longer did everything without question. One evening, he said something that kept echoing inside me. "Mom, you've always been our support. What's happening?" I took a deep breath and answered calmly, "I'm still your mother, but I'm also a person." He didn't respond, but I saw in his eyes that that sentence wasn't easy to accept. And I understand, because it took me years to accept it myself. The days went by, and the tension kept building. Nothing was said directly, but everything was felt. The silences grew longer, the conversations shorter, the atmosphere heavier. And in the middle of all of it, I began to wonder if I was being selfish, whether, after so many years of helping, I shouldn't simply continue. Whether I was being ungrateful to my own children. Those doubts consumed me, because inside me, there still lived that woman who believed her worth was measured by how much she did for others. But at the same time, there was another voice, quieter, more recent, but steady, that said, "And what about you, Meher?" That question returned stronger, more impossible to ignore. One afternoon, I gathered my courage and sat down with my children in the living room. My heart was racing, my hands were sweating, but I knew I needed to speak. "I need to tell you both something." They looked at me, attentive, and I continued. "I've been thinking about going back to India." The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, almost suffocating. My daughter was the first to react. "What do you mean, Mom?" "Go back." My son stayed silent, but the look in his eyes changed completely. "I've been here for a long time." "Longer than I planned," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And now I feel like I need to go back." My daughter shook her head, anxious. "But why?" "We need you here." That phrase hit me hard directly. But this time I didn't go quiet. "And I need myself." She didn't like the answer. I could see it in her expression. "That doesn't make sense." "Mom, you've always been here for us." "Yes, I always have," I replied. "But I haven't been there for myself." My son finally spoke. "Does this have to do with Dad?" I felt a tightening in my chest. I breathed deeply. That too, they exchanged glances. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than any argument. They didn't know. They didn't know what I had lost. They didn't know what that phone call had meant to me. They didn't know because I had never told them. I had always protected them, always hidden things, always endured. "He asked for a divorce," I finally said. The words came out softly, but heavily. My daughter brought her hand to her mouth. My son went completely still. "What?" she whispered. I nodded. A few weeks ago, the silence that came after was different. It was no longer tension. It was shock. It was guilt. It was reality. "Why didn't you tell us?" my son asked, his voice low. I smiled faintly, a sad smile, because I didn't want to be one more problem that shook them. I could see it for the first time. They began to see something beyond the role I filled. I lost my marriage, I continued. And I didn't even notice when it happened. My voice wavered. But I didn't stop. "I spent years here saying it was for you." And it was. But it was also because I didn't know how to leave. My daughter began to cry. "Mom, we never wanted this." I know, I always knew. But wanting something doesn't change what happens when you stop paying attention. "I'm not blaming you," I said, calmly. "I'm just trying to understand what I need now." My son ran his hand over his face, clearly shaken. "And what do you need?" he asked, and this time I knew how to answer. "I need to go back." That was the first time I said it with certainty, without doubt, without maybe, without fear. But their reaction was not what I expected. My daughter shook her head, desperate. "No, Mom, you can't go now. Not like this." "Why?" I asked calmly. She hesitated, and then said, "Because we still need you," those words that once held me captive. Now set me free. Because for the first time I understood. They would always need something. There would always be something. There would always be a reason for me to stay. But what about me? How much longer would I postpone my own life? I stood up slowly. I looked at them both and said, with a calm I didn't know I had, "I spent years staying. Now I need to learn how to leave." My daughter was crying. My son said nothing, but I knew. That was the moment I had postponed for so long. The moment of decision. And for the first time in many years, I didn't turn back. That night, no one slept well. I could hear my daughter's soft footsteps in the hallway, going back and forth between her room and the kitchen. My son stayed up late, sitting in the living room, staring at nothing, as if he were trying to reorganize everything inside his head. And I lay there looking at the ceiling. But unlike other nights, my mind was not confused. It was clear for the first time in many years. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The days that followed were difficult. There were no shouting matches, no major arguments, but there was a heaviness in the air, a quiet sadness that accompanied every small moment. My daughter tried to convince me with arguments. "Mom, you can wait a little longer. Just until I'm more settled, just a few more months." I listened with warmth, with patience, but something inside me had already changed. I knew that just a little longer. That was how months had turned into years. That was how I had lost my marriage. My son didn't push as hard, but his silence said a great deal. One night, he sat beside me on the sofa and asked, "Have you really decided?" I looked at him and replied, "Yes." He took a deep breath. "Then when are you leaving?" That question gave me a tightening in the chest, because until then, my decision had been emotional. Now, it was becoming real soon, I said. I began to organize my things, and it was in that simple process, sorting through clothes, objects, memories, that I realized how small my life there had been. I didn't have much, some clothes, a few household items, very few things that were truly mine, because, in truth, I had never built anything of my own there. I had only lived around the lives of others. I found an old photograph tucked away at the back of a drawer. It was Harjit and me, still young. I was holding our small son in my arms, and he was beside me, his hand on my shoulder. We were smiling, a simple smile, but a real one. I ran my fingers over the photo slowly and felt a mix of pain and acceptance. Our time had ended. Not with arguments, not with betrayal, but with distance, with silence, with absence, and sometimes that hurts even more. In the week before my trip, the atmosphere in the house shifted again, but this time, something was different. My children began to draw closer. My daughter started sitting with me in the kitchen, even when she didn't need to. My son began helping with small things, as if trying to reclaim time he hadn't realized was slipping away. And for the first time, we truly talked without rushing, without distractions. without that constant busyness that had always crowded everything out. One evening, my daughter took my hand and said, "Mom, I think we were selfish." I shook my head. "No," she insisted. We got so used to having you here. And we never noticed what you were giving up." I squeezed her hand with warmth. "You were living your lives. There's no blame in that," she cried. And so did I, because deep down, we both knew it wasn't about blame. It was about a lack of awareness, about how sometimes we love, but we don't see. The day before my trip, my son came to me with an envelope. "This is for you." I opened it. It was money. I looked at him, surprised. "I can't accept this," he replied. Firmly, "Yes, you can. This time, let us take care of you." That phrase, I tucked away in my heart. The day of the farewell arrived. We went to the airport together. The drive was quiet, but it wasn't a heavy silence like before. It was a silence full of feeling, full of everything that no longer needed to be said. We arrived. I hugged my kid, a longue embrasse, a close one, as if, in that moment, I were holding all the years we had lived together there. "I love you," I said. They answered together. "We love you too, Mom." My daughter was crying. My son was holding back tears. And I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness, not sadness. It was balance. Before I walked through to the gate, I looked at them one more time. And I thought of everything. The years of sacrifice. The choices I made. The ones I didn't make. The mistakes. The things I got right. And I understood something that changed everything inside me. We can love deeply and still need to step away. One does not cancel out the other. During the flight, I sat looking out the window. The clouds looked like a white, endless sea. And for the first time in many years, I wasn't running away, I was going back. But not just to a place. I was going back to myself. When I arrived in India, the air felt different. The smell, the warmth, the noise. Everything embraced me in a way I hadn't known I needed. Ludhiana was still the same, but I was not. My house was there, quieter, emptier. But still, mine. I walked in slowly. I ran my hand along the walls and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Harjit was no longer there, and that hurt. It still hurts, but this time, the pain did not break me. It taught me. With time, I began rebuilding my life, slowly, without rushing. Learning simple things, like making decisions for myself, like going out alone, like listening to myself. Things that seem small, but that, for me, were new. Today, when I look back, I have no regrets about having helped my children. No regrets about having gone. No regrets about having stayed. Every choice had its reason. Every sacrifice had its worth. But if I could say something to other women like me, I would say, helping your family is beautiful. Loving is necessary. Giving of yourself is part of it. But losing yourself should not be. Many immigrants live this way. Giving everything, enduring everything, postponing their own lives, believing that later will come in time. But sometimes that later never arrives. I learned this late, but still in time to go back. Time to begin again. Time to find myself. Today, I still miss my children every single day. But now, it is not a longing that holds me captive. It is a longing that walks alongside me. And for the first time in my life, I am not only a mother. I am not only a wife. I am not only someone for others. I am Meher, and that, finally, is enough.